think Rick will need a lot of prompting, and he might even answer some questions at the end if he's feeling like it. But the main thing I need to remind you of is there are books out there. Buy them books. You know, there's at least 2 by Rick Wilson. There's one by me, should you be, missing college football. But I still persist in thinking that anybody who wanted a copy of Tribal has a copy of Tribal in Tallahassee, because Sally Bradshaw's been selling the heck out of it. So anyway, we'll just kick off and see where we go.
You know, Diane, speaking of the me thing, my grandmother once said, my grandmother was from Marianna, Florida, the youngest of 9 brothers and sisters, a true Southern eccentric in the best possible way. When I was a little kid one time, she crosses her arms, she looks at my mother, she goes, "That boy does not have a temper, but oh, that child has a mean streak."
And we're so grateful because how could we have gotten through 2020 without Rick Wilson? I mean, we were already drinking heavily, probably taking drugs, but just to know that Rick Wilson was out there picking on Donald Trump was a beautiful thing.
You know, I talked to the voiceover talent that did a bunch of our ads last year. She was the girl with the whispers. "Donald, they're coming for you." I can't even get close to it, right? And I called her today and I said, "Hey, we got a Matt Gaetz ad for you." And she's like, "Yes, please." And the first thing she says, just ad lib, she goes, "How about I do it this way? Hey, Congressman Daddy, Venmo me." You know, it is one of the things, though, that I really believe in politics, is we can pretend that it's Marquess of Queensberry rules, and we can pretend that everybody goes off the field and goes in the locker room, "Hey, good game," in politics in America now. But we don't. It's not how it works anymore. It has become an intensely tribalized, personalized, and weirdly unideological way of political combat. And Republicans don't believe in anything anymore. When I was growing up as a Republican, I believed in national security. Now, I went to college in the mid-'80s in DC. I was, studying the Soviet Union, for God's sake, because that was the big thing. And I looked at, that's what kind of drew me into the Republican Party. I looked at it as a party of national security. They had beliefs about, it was the twilight struggle between Soviet communism and the American constitutional system. That was an easy choice for me. I believe in individual liberty and free markets and those things, and not in an unlimited kooky libertarian, guy who can't get a date way, but in a sort of broad philosophical sense. But now the Republican Party consists of owning the libs, hating the media, and turning people who you wouldn't put in charge of a Waffle House into national political leaders. I mean, let's be honest. You wouldn't let Donald Trump run a Jiffy Lube, okay? This is a man who has failed up his entire life and who is this train wreck of a human being the whole time. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't put him in charge of anything. You wouldn't put an entitled kid like Matt Gaetz, who probably had his ass wiped by his deputy under-butler until he was in his 20s, on the House Judiciary Committee if you were a serious political party. You wouldn't do it. But here we are. Because my former party, and I'm an independent now, is fundamentally unserious about the business of government. Now, my friends, the Democrats are fundamentally unserious about the business of politics because they pretend all the time that it's one thing when it isn't. They legitimately believe, and it makes me weep sometimes because I hear my Democratic friends say, "Well, we're just going to come out and we're going to show them our 474-page healthcare plan. And that's going to move the voters." Really? Tell me more. Because you know what happens when you show me your 474-page healthcare plan? I have 4 or 5 of my nerds start reading it. I'm not going to read it. I mean, honestly, I'm not a policy guy, let's be honest. I'm going to have these kids start reading it, and they're going to find 10 things in there that scare the shit out of grandma. And I'm going to ruthlessly exploit them. And the Democrats, they keep thinking that policy alone is sufficient. I tell them this a lot. they're holistically bad at this. They're great in some areas. Sometimes they'll get a phenomenal candidate. They tend to have better luck finding superstar candidates. Like Bill Clinton, moral failure, political superstar. Barack Obama, probably their best all-around player they've had since FDR. I mean, by leaps and bounds. And they suck at understanding what people really think. They poll, I mean, a lot of our allies in the fight last year were like, oh, did you focus group that ad? Did you poll this and that? I'm like, get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about? I got 300 ads to make in a year. I don't have time to sit there and water it down and squish it down into nothing and turn it into goo. And that's what happens with a lot of this. They believe there's an algorithm for persuasion, and there's not. They believe there's an algorithm for changing the political alchemy of the country, and there's not.
But didn't Frank Luntz think that? Didn't he think, you know, if you just use certain words that people magically drool or whatever, sit down, roll over, play dead?
There's a reason in 30 years that I've worked on one campaign with Frank. That was my choice. Look, Frank is a great showman. Frank is a fascinating character. He's a brilliant guy. But the idea that you have, you know, mere word mojo and you just do this one thing and people go, oh yes, of course, it's not the death tax, it's insane. It doesn't work that way. And the idea that you don't understand people is fatal in politics. I've done races in 38 states, plus national work. From campaigns to super PAC work to corporate work. And I can tell you one thing. The idea that America is a politically homogenous country on either side of the ideological divide is fucking nuts. It's absolutely batshit crazy, and I see it all the time. I see it from the Trump people who believed that Donald Trump legitimately had a chance in California. Now, look, yeah, maybe if meteors struck San Francisco and Los Angeles and wiped out all forms of human life in a 100-mile radius of each, but otherwise, no. But that's a belief that, you know, that was the belief that Trumpism was this universal movement sweeping the country, and that everybody wanted to MAGA, and that nationalist populism was, in fact, an optimistic pro-American movement instead of a shitty, narrowly veiled, racist, authoritarian statism. I mean, that is a misread. The Democrats believe that people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania are screaming out for the Green New Deal and light socialism with a frothy topping. It's not there. People in the middle of the country are not like people on the coasts. People in Florida, sure as hell aren't like people anywhere else. And this state is so sui generis in so many ways. And if you were writing Florida into a movie script, people would be like, no, too much. Pull that shit back. There's no way the son of a former Senate president is Venmoing hookers. There's no way that's true. That's way too much. Come on, man. Nobody's gonna buy that.
And lo and behold.
And yet here we are.
It couldn't happen to a nicer way.
Look, I get what it's like to sort of come from a privileged, shitty white background. I've lived that suffering. But luckily I had a grandmother and parents who would not tolerate if you act like an asshole all the time. And so, no one in his life ever said stop being an asshole. And when he discovered that we live in a post-partisan, post-policy era, and discovered that if you're an asshole, you get on this hamster wheel. And you run on the hamster wheel, and what does it do? It gets you on Fox News. So say something controversial. Matt goes out and says, I believe kindergartners should be eaten, whatever. Everyone reacts, oh God, how can he say that? That's absurd, that's ridiculous. Tucker Carlson has him on, and they have this fake tone of intellectual probity. Well, we must at least consider the question of eating kindergartners, or the libs win. And then Matt or whomever then puts out an email and says, can you believe they're trying to cancel me for wanting to eat kindergartners? I can't believe this is outrageous. Lather, rinse, repeat. It goes on with Josh Hawley, it goes on with Marco, it goes on with Rick Scott, it goes on with Ron DeSantis, it goes on with Ron Johnson and Cindy Hyde-Smith and Ted Cruz. And by the way, I've made up 2 rules in my life that are absolutely universally true. One by accident, one by proof of experience. The one by accident was everything Trump touches dies. It has become an iron law of American political physics, and I'm damn proud of it. My daughter's up in the audience, and you can put that on my unmarked, otherwise unmarked gravestone. People will notice me. And the second rule is there are 2 types of people in the world: people who hate Ted Cruz and Ted Cruz. And I will tell you, having interacted and met and dealt with Ted on a number of matters, that emotion you feel when you see Fat Wolverine on TV, that emotion you feel in your stomach, that combination of like wanting to flee and wanting to set something on fire and possibly like in Bird Box running out into traffic, amplify it times 1,000 in person. The most oleaginous, I mean, there's just something about that guy that makes me want to buy a flamethrower.
Why is he impersonating Fidel Castro now? He's got the beard, he's been in a little camo. I mean, that's very puzzling to me.
Well, Diane, this is very simple. It goes back to what happened the day after I was born, which was JFK was killed. Obviously, Ted Cruz's dad
did it.
Was involved in the murder of JFK, which is obviously connected to the Cubans. So Ted Cruz may be Fidel Castro's illegitimate son. I'm not saying I have any facts on that. It could be, though. I mean,
well, as former Senator Al Franken said, I don't hate Ted Cruz as much as other people hate Ted Cruz, and I hate Ted Cruz. That man has no friends.
Well, you know, but it is symbolic of Washington today. These guys are not there to lead. They're not there to govern. They're not there to do anything for or to the country, thank God. They're there to play a different game. Post-partisan, post-political. It is all about media attention. It is all about online fundraising. It is all about making yourself the center of a spectacle. And not to get into sort of a postmodern thing, but the spectacle is all that remains. The spectacle is all there is now. It is not a party. And a lot of Democrats are playing the same game. I gotta be perfectly blunt. Oh, I'm sure a lot of Democrats are in the audience. A lot of my friends are Democrats. A lot of my friends are Democrats. How could I, you know? But there are a lot of Democrats who are now playing the same game. I'm gonna be perfectly blunt about this. AOC and Josh Hawley are just the flip sides of a coin. They don't care about governing. They are about this idea of their fame and presence shaping the political battlefield in their favor. And I find that disturbing because, you know, I like nerds and I like people who grind away at policy because at least when I was a young man, graced with both, you know, energy and hair, working for this guy, you've never heard of him, he's a small-time player in politics named Dick Cheney when he was Secretary of Defense. We dealt with Democrats all the time. We dealt with Les Aspin and Sam Nunn and all these people. Bipartisanship was a real thing that happened.
Because it had to.
Because that's how the world worked. They recognized the country was not homogenous. They recognized the country was not one ideological flavor, and that the founders' intent in the Constitution was that there would be a dynamic push and pull back and forth all the time. Things would be different, you know, different sets of desires in different states would obtain, and you would have to reach this thing. You'd have to use the C word and compromise, and no one wants to say the C word anymore. And now it has become this very sort of Machiavellian struggle all the time. You're either, you're describing the other side in the most apocalyptic terms at every moment. It's, yeah, if you don't do this, if you don't vote for Donald Trump, Antifa will come to your house and set up a taco truck on your street after killing your dog. You know, it will be...
Eating your dog
Well...
in a taco.
Carne canis, if you will. Yes. So... But this struggle and this idea that everything's the apocalypse, everything's the end. In a weird way, for us, Donald Trump was the only time that was really going to be true. Because I will tell you something, no, all snark aside. The bad guys only have to win one election. We've seen what they're doing right now in the country. I consider myself to be an individual liberty conservative. I believe in the Constitution, okay? And I believe, as a conservative, the more people who have their voices heard and their votes tallied and their opinions registered in the way that the founders intended, which was at the ballot box, the better and smarter and richer and more small d democratic this small r Republican system will be. But right now, people in my former party in 23 states have 264 bills that aggressively seek to disenfranchise primarily African American voters because they want to pick their voters. They don't want to be picked by the voters. They want to pick their voters. In Georgia, what we saw was just the tip of the spear. They're trying to push the Overton window to say, we have Republican majorities in these states and Republican governors, and fuck you. We'll pick who votes for us. We'll say who gets to vote. We'll say when they get to vote or if they get to vote. And I think it is one of the most dangerous moments in our history because once you, as elected officials, decide you're going to set the ground rules for who can vote beyond certain very narrow categories, okay? No, I do not believe people who are here without US citizenship should vote. They should not. That's not the intent of the Constitution. And the idea that felons should not vote is a long stretch of case law, although I do favor the restitution of voting rights for felons and other rights for felons once they have done their time and done their restitution. But this idea that we're gonna have a bunch of Republican legislatures do things like Georgia did, and Florida's gonna do the same thing, where they will give the legislature or a Republican governor the power to reach down into a county election office and say, nope, we're gonna count the votes instead of you. Nope, we're gonna certify the votes instead of you. The bad guys have to win one election. And they'll do that in ways, they'll expand that kind of idea. They'll iterate that out beyond the kind of yokel shittiness you're seeing in a lot of these states to something that is more systematized, more driven by a fundraising apparatus behind it. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of Republicans say things like, well, corporate America is so liberal, they're trying to force their values on us. Well, corporate America, I can tell you from sad experience, they are profiles in chicken shit for the most part, okay? They are driven by now a fear of an extortion, basically, by powerful lobbyists who come in and say, by the way, Coca-Cola, how do you like to pay a higher set of taxes across this state? Because we'll pass them if you don't do what we want. If you don't shut up, give us your checks and shut up. They go to Delta and they say, you're not going to get a tax break on fuel and maintenance services that Georgia has extended to Delta to keep them here in Atlanta for God knows how long. You're not going to get that unless you shut up. So, I'm a pretty close student of the Constitution and I miss the word lobbyist in it. But there's a sort of dynamic right now where American corporations on one hand say things like, we believe in diversity and inclusion and the value of having every voice heard. And on the other hand, when you've got egregious cases like Georgia or Michigan or here in Florida, suddenly they're mute. Suddenly they say nothing. Suddenly it's, no, never mind. No, we can't be in politics. I mean, Mitch McConnell, in the apotheosis and the goddamn stellar peak of astounding hypocrisy, well, I don't think that corporations should be talking about politics. It's just outrageous. Give me that goddamn check, you heathens. You know, it blew my mind, but you know, people should recognize one thing about Mitch McConnell. There has never been, and I say this as a historian of Washington power, including LBJ and Harry Reid, there has never been a Senate Majority Leader who understands how to use the levers of power in Washington better than Mitch McConnell. You can hate him all you want, but he is a player in that game, whereas, you know, there's a reason why the Democrats don't hold the majority for long, whereas Chuck Schumer is not as good at that. And by not as good, I mean to say, I could pick a random guy from behind the bus station on Tennessee Street who would have a better grasp of the politics of Washington than Chuck Schumer. He gets rolled by Mitch McConnell and guys like Joe Manchin all the time. I'm like, dude, put a hide on the barn, go kill somebody politically, and then you will start to understand that they only score it on money and power. But again, holistically bad at politics.
Well, you know, the 14th and 15th Amendment's so overrated, you know. I mean, we've kind of been, not here, I mean, it isn't exactly like Jim Crow, but it is sort of reminiscent of what happened after Reconstruction stopped. When the Democrats, because that's who was in power at that time in the South, decided to pick their voters, and those voters all looked a lot more like me than they did, say, Barack Obama. Funny that.
Well, you know, it is yet to manifest with literacy tests and a jar full of jelly beans where the African Americans have to guess the number of beans in order to be able to vote. But it has become something that these guys went out. And by the way, almost all these bills are written by a small group of assholes in DC, okay? They're model bills. They adjust them to the state legislative territory. Some are.
Alec?
It's not Alec, actually. No, it's different. It's this guy's at Heritage, and that would be a rabbit hole we could go down for like 2 hours. But these people are fundamentally not believers in, say, the voting patterns that have existed since the Civil Rights Act. They're not fans of it. And I mean, look, sometimes they say the quiet part loud. This week, National Review says, wouldn't it be better if we had fewer but more quality voters? Work with me here. How exactly, what exactly would you say is a higher quality voter? Does it have a certain lighter skin tone? Is that what you're trying to imply? Because that's what they're trying to imply. You know, Stuart Stevens, my good friend Stuart Stevens, I wrote in my first book a little bit about like the shock effect of Trump on me personally as a political consultant and writer and everything else was, you know, to realize that, you know, we had to admit it at a point where while there were the vast majority of Republican voters were not active racists, that there were enough of them that we took out every 2 years, took them out, hosed them off, and made them go vote by scaring the shit out of them, that it was a thing we did. Stuart wrote a whole book about it, and it's one of those books I read it the first time, and I read it in one sitting the first time. I was like, God damn, I wish I'd written that book. But it is something that we you know, you can't look away from it, and you can't let the Republicans say things like, well, look at the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Alan West. He's an African American. Look at this guy. He's African. You can pick outliers in any group. I mean, well, Alan West, by the way, former Florida man, former congressman from the 23rd, I think it was, down in something, East Florida. Alan West is crazier than a shithouse rat, okay? He's so crazy that when they did redistricting last time, and I was tangentially involved in it, everyone was looking at each other like, we could get rid of Alan West. And this is a bunch of fucking Republicans around the table like, you know, Alan West, just do a little thing. Suddenly Alan West district looked really terrible, and yet he just disappears, and poof, he's gone like Kaiser crazy. And then he shows up in Texas, and now he's the chairman of the party, and every day is some great new gift. Do you think Ted Cruz is, see, the thing about Ted Cruz is he's not crazy. He's not even funny. Alan West is both funny and crazy. And so when he says things like, well, Texas could secede, I'm like, try that again? How'd that work out for you last time?
It went really well in
yeah.
1861.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Texas has never gotten over being its own country.
I know, right?
And they may be, I don't want to concede this, but they may be as weird or weirder than Florida.
No.
Okay, all right. I'm going to take your word for it because I don't want it to be true.
Right.
So-
Look, Florida is weird at scale. Texas is weird in a scattered kind of way.
Yeah.
Florida's weird at scale. And I mean, one of the things, I was talking to a reporter this week about the Matt Gaetz situation, and it's like, well, Tallahassee doesn't have a reputation for corruption. I'm like, oh, fuck out. I'm like, you're right. This is a guy, I kid you not, from the New York Times.
Bless his heart.
I'm like, oh, Dumpling. Are you kidding me? I'm like, pound for pound, this town makes Mogadishu look safe, and it makes Miami look like Switzerland. I mean, it is, you know, when you go back in time, and I'm old enough to remember tales of the thing called the trailers, where there was back in the day, all right, so absolute power corrupts, and one-party states are absolutely corrupt, and therefore they are the fastest way to like giant blowouts. When the Democratic-led pork chop gang ran the state of Florida, ran it with an iron fist from the 50s, 60s, and part of the 70s, they were guys, a lot of panhandle guys, a lot of Central Florida guys, and back then Central Florida looked a lot more like North Florida than South Florida. It used to be that everything north of I-4 was basically the Northwest Frontier Province of Pakistan in terms of its conservatism and corruption. But they used to have these trailers south of town that were basically whorehouses, and this party stop. And you know, it blew up finally. The corruption became so egregious that at that point, you know, even the slowest members of the press corps were like, uh-huh.
They can't all be their nieces.
Well, you know, when Bill Clinton won, I came back here and I was briefly as a staffer in the legislature. I was working with this guy named Robert Hardin, and Robert was famous. It was the youngest member elected to the House, and the youngest member elected to the Senate. And Robert had at the time an undiagnosed mental illness. Robert was acting that out. And being sharper than the average, you know, bear, I was like, Robert, have you seen anybody? You're having some episodes that are not standard issue Republican. Disappearing for days at a time, weeks at a time, living in his attic in Destin. Yeah, and he needed help, really did. I'm not making light of it. There are funny parts about it, but it was not funny at the time. But what was funny was Senator W.D. Childers, the Banty Rooster, this wee little gnome of a man, and probably all of 4'9", okay? And now, mind you, I've just come from 4 years in Washington, D.C., working in the Pentagon, where we have ethics officers, and we have all this stuff, and I'm, you know.
So exotic.
So exotic for Florida. WD comes in with a greasy bag. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Comes in and goes, I want you to give this to Robert. I know he's got financial trouble. He drops it on the desk. And I can see from the geometry of the bag that there is money inside of it. Stacks of money inside of it. I'm like, oh God, the FBI is gonna come to the fucking door any second. And I'm like, Senator, I can't accept that on Robert. I like literally put my hands like behind my back. I'm like, Senator, I can't accept that on Robert's behalf. He goes, you give it to him, just give it to him. He's like pushing it across the desk. I'm like, Senator, when you walk out the door, I'm gonna call Minnie, your assistant. I'm gonna have her come get this money because I cannot take it. He goes, nah, come on, boy, you can take that money. Now, WD left the Florida Senate and moved back to the Panhandle. And one of his associates was found dead under a house after drinking antifreeze.
Willie Jr.
And that's right, Willie Jr.
Yep.
And this guy had there's like a body count around this. But the corruption is now a feature, not a bug, okay? And this is what happens in one-party states and institutions. New York State is a one-party state. It is lavishly, wildly corrupt, okay? Crazy. I worked for Giuliani, I lived in New York City, worked for Giuliani, did his Senate campaign, did his mayor's race. I've seen it up close. Florida is lavishly corrupt because it's a one-party state. The political dynamism this country was supposed to have, as our founders intended, has been broken. Broken for a lot of different reasons. California, equally, completely fuck-a-doodle-doo corrupt. I mean, crazy. And the number of zeros in the corruption out there, it's impressive. It's impressive. And I'm talking to a friend of mine in Silicon Valley, very, very wealthy and also rich. And he's like, yeah, so we wanted to build this like runway on this mountain, but it was parkland, but I got it done. I'm like, of course you did. Of course you did, because you built a jet runway on a mountaintop that was protected land. Because of course you did. I'm like, so what did it cost? He goes, well, you know, I mean, like 40. I'm like, so $40 million. The scale of it there is just like completely out of control. But it's also getting out of control here too. I mean, look, the price of a home in Palm Beach County has gone up 360% in the last couple of years. This is not just the Russians coming in. It was down at the Miami Book Fair in December of 19. And we're staying on the W and go up onto the roof. And it was so emblematic of the new Florida to me. It's these big, fat Russian, I mean, I got myself a belly. These Russian guys, they rock a belly. I mean, they rock a good, hard, 75 pounds of belly. And they're all surrounded by their nieces.
Nieces.
Obviously.
Lots of nieces.
Their nieces who look like, I mean, and all their nieces weirdly seem to be fitness models. It's crazy. And I overhear one of them on the phone, and my Russian's shitty and rusty, but I overhear one of them on the phone. He goes, yes, the Department of Business and he says DBPR, and he's clearly working the system. They've come here with waves of money. There's a lot of very powerful corporations in the state, a lot of very rich individuals in the state, and anytime you combine a one-party state with money, you get a kleptocracy. And it's what we're becoming. And to loop back to the bad guys only have to win one election, the good guys have to start winning elections. People have to start winning elections here, and God forbid, I love my friends in the Democratic Party, but they cannot organize a two-car motorcade half the time. They need to get much better at the work, the shitty, grisly work of raising the money and doing the ads and doing the comms and not picking an issue that makes you happy. But because look, if tomorrow we come back with analytics and data and research that says the Democratic Party in Florida should run on providing every family with a kayak. There'll be people who go, no, we gotta talk about climate change or this and that. They'll avoid the kayak like it's the plague. Buy the fucking kayak. Give them the fucking kayak. If they want a kayak, give them a fucking kayak. But this idea that you can just always run on like these ephemeral policies and things like that, you know, they make your base feel great, but your base is not sufficient in either side, by the way. One of the dirty little secrets of the state of Florida, that the Democrats have lost on time and time and time again, is they calculate Democratic men into their equation, and then assholes like me come in and go, hey, over here.
6 of them?
You'd be surprised how many functional Democrats switch their vote and vote Republican. I haven't run the voter file in Florida for 16 or 20 on Democratic men flipping for Trump. I promise you, it's a bigger number than you think. Look, Democrats in the state saw a big drop off with Hispanic votes, and they're thinking, well, why? I can't understand why. I mean, isn't socialism popular? Don't people love it? You know, and I screamed bloody murder to a lot of the people around the Biden campaign, while staying within the rules of the super PAC environment. Made it very clear, you know, what you think works and what really works, they need to be coincident in a campaign to win. They need to be the same thing. I mean, if Joe Biden had gone down to Little Havana, stood in the middle of Caliocho and said, Fidel Castro was a monster, and I hope he burns in hell for all eternity, You know how many Democratic votes you would have lost? Zero. Zero. But you would have short-circuited a bullshit attack. Yeah, when I think of like vanguard of the proletariat, seize the means of production, I think Joe Biden. Yeah, but that's what Trump turned him into with these people. They thought, oh my God, I'm back in Cuba, I'm back in Venezuela. If it's Joe Biden, it's going to be Maduro or Castro. Oh my God. Sometimes go the other way. Check their shit.
Yeah, I think sometimes the Democrats, I mean, I guess this is a good impulse in general human life, want people to see what they see. Like, don't build your house on a barrier island because of climate change. And then the response is, I'm rich, I'm gonna build my house wherever the hell I want, because I'm rich and I don't care. And the Democrats have no answer to that other than, well, you shouldn't. And I understand that, because it's morally correct. But so the Democrats, and God knows I'm a yellow dog as a yellow dog can get, but this kind of idea that you should be a good doggy and understand the world the way that their policy people do with the 470 million page bill. And then on the Republicans, they have gotten postmodern because they're not about anything. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually a performance artist. I don't think she's at all a politician, because she isn't about anything other than being crazy as a sprayed roach. And I mean, that woman, she was down at the same deal that Matt Gaetz was, the Women for Trump to Make America More Greater again in Doral. And she can barely put a sentence together, and I'm just thinking, and yet it doesn't matter. She can stand there and just recite her grocery list.
It doesn't matter. As long as she's going to own the libs. That's the key metric.
And she's armed.
Are they gonna cause something? Are they gonna say something so transgressive that it causes the rest of America and the press to say, "Wow, she's crazy," and then she sends out an email that says, "They call me crazy." It's not because because she cares about it. It's because she wants to raise money off of it, and thus the great hamster wheel in the sky rotates again and again and again.
She gets on Tucker again and again and again. And Matt Gaetz, as far as I know, is the only person who screwed that up.
Oh my God, I love that moment so much. I had one of my video editors blow it up, the shot of Tucker's face. And these two little divots appear. This little H appears in Tucker's brow. And you can tell that if Tucker had somehow had a lump of coal shoved in his ass before the show, that a solid diamond would have popped out. He was so nervous. That is a man who was thinking, oh God, he's talking about a dinner with my wife and one of his whores. What am I going to do? Dear Jesus, I'm surprised Tucker didn't go, what? I can't hear you. It was insane. The moment was so painful. And yet I wish Tucker could feel that moment all the time, over and over again. And look, there are two things that make all this bullshit possible on the Republican side. The first is Fox. And I knew Roger Ailes as a young man, not when he was young, when I was young, and Roger liked me. Roger thought I was a smart guy. I learned a lot from Roger. You know why? Because Roger was a goddamn genius, okay? Roger was the greatest television producer in the history of mankind by far. That's like also saying that Hitler was the greatest war leader in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. Roger built a machine that Rupert monetized that broke American politics. Broke it fundamentally. Broke it right down the goddamn center. Now, it was brilliantly constructed. It was brilliantly executed. It was built on this architecture of pure grievance and anger and resentment and fear, but it worked. Now, I will tell you, I'm on MSNBC a lot. A lot of my friends work there. A lot of my friends are in anchor chairs there. MSNBC has never had the power to be a normative force in the Democratic Party that Fox is every day. And that normative force says to its audience every day, its gigantic goddamn audience every day, the black people are coming to kill you. The Mexicans are coming to kill you. Your kid will never get a job because they'll say the wrong thing in a college essay. You're going to get canceled because you misgender someone at work. Okay? It's brilliant at it. And you know what makes it more brilliant? Way too often, the Democrats hand them the sword they use to cut off their head. Okay? Way too often they do that. You know what America is not? America is not woke. I've traveled this great country. I've done politics, like I said, in 38 states. I've sat behind the glass in 100 focus groups. And those people in the Midwest, they don't think of themselves as evil. They don't think of themselves as racist. They don't think of themselves as anti-trans or bigoted. But when they don't conform to whatever the rule is that minute, and they feel that pressure coming down on them, they respond by running back to Fox and running back to fear and saying, well, maybe I am being oppressed. These guys in the Midwest who don't work. Let me give you an example. In 2004, I was in a focus group in Detroit, Michigan, outside of Detroit, Oakland County, Michigan. And this guy said, you know what, I voted for Bush, I'm just miserable. I feel like, you know, our plant is closing, you know, we're losing our jobs, and my kid is, you know, my kid's on his, you know, first deployment, I'm scared to death. He's in Iraq, he's gonna get killed. We bring the same focus group back in 2008. At this point, the guy's like, I'm voting for Barack Obama. My kid's on his third tour. My job is gone. He's gonna save me. He's gonna, they're gonna do job training. He's gonna save me. And 16, the guy is now a fanatic, bloody-minded Trump supporter. And we did this is a longitudinal study of these people, right? He's older, he's meaner, he's pissed off. You know why? Because his kid's back from the war and can't get a fucking job. He's now working in a call center. He's not working in a union job that pays him $45 an hour with health care and dental. He's working in a call center for minimum wage. This country is broken in a lot of ways. You can't just promise people you're gonna retrain them and give them some magical thing. This is something the Democrats have to really focus on. Joe Biden's made exactly the right call in the first part of his administration. Focus on COVID. It's the biggest issue of our time, fundamental. If he can focus on not getting dragged into bank shot, pie in the sky, dreamy-eyed shit, and instead becoming job creation president in a real and fundamental way, might reset the landscape a little bit. If he gets dragged into every goddamn wish list item, Green New Deal and you know, international international climate things that don't scan to people as climate change, but instead scan as, oh, you're gonna kill off the factory I work in that makes cars? Great, fuck you. I mean, people need to understand on the Democratic side that white male resentment, yeah, there's some racism in the water, okay? There really is. But a lot of it is because they've been promised some glittering future that does not occur. And I think Biden actually has the potentiality to deliver on it in ways that a lot of younger Democratic politicians might not, because he's a practical guy. He's been around the block. He knows how the world looks and works and is. He knows you got to make deals. Nobody's going to get everything they want out of that deal. But if he does something that sort of like glue the country back together a little bit, he can go down as one of our greatest presidents.
Wow. Well, I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to wrap us up and see if Rick wants to answer a few questions. But
no charges were pressed. No, it's a different question.
Have
Sorry.
an alibi. I know. Is DeSantis going to run for president in 24?
Ron DeSantis, and more specifically, his wife, Lady Kathy, what's her name? Casey.
I wondered if she was the brains of the operation.
Oh, she's the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
And by the way, do not underestimate that woman for 1 millisecond. I mean, She makes Hillary Clinton look like Betty Crocker. I mean, she's got a brain on her. She is smart as a whip. Do not underestimate her. I'm not kidding. In fact, there's let's call it a story instead of a rumor, floating around that FDLE informed DeSantis last year, late in the year, that there were shenanigans afoot with Brother Gates, and that Casey was the one who pulled Matt's forehead back and dragged the straight razor across the throat. Matt was suddenly persona non grata in DeSantis' world after that. And that she tried to keep him away from any pictures of them together, etc. She's smart, don't underestimate her. He's ambitious as hell. And by the way, what did he do this week? He showed you that he plays the new game of politics. The 60 Minutes story, he did not come out and say, let me refute you point by point on the facts. He went out and said, the deep state's trying to take me out with their paid libtard shill media cucks. And did the whole, hair-tearing, chest-thumping, I will not tolerate these libtards. He was feeding one audience. That's the Fox audience. Why? Because he went on Fox after. What did he do? Pounded the email lists. They're trying to cancel me. The deep state, once again, is shown. So you gotta also look at the candidates in the 24 field like this, okay? Here's Donald Trump, way up here, okay? Donald Trump will stay in the race on paper unless he is in prison, which is, by the way, unfortunately, a sadly unlikely event because the judicial system is they're gonna hesitate and they're gonna drag it out. And the DOJ is gonna go, well, maybe you shouldn't, even though he tried to overthrow the government. But call me crazy. It's small things, right? Donald Trump will monetize his potential presidential run until the last dog dies, okay? And all these guys have a red line they may or may not cross before them. And that is, does he go to New Hampshire or Iowa? Because I'm gonna tell you, the Trump family just came off the best grift they've ever run in their long generational griftage. They would love to have another turn of the wheel. And so, for everything that these guys have done to suck up to Trump, none of it matters. Because the minute they get in the race and they start getting attention and favorability, it's a zero-sum game for Donald. He will then say, Ron DeSantis was never truly loyal to me. Why, looking at him now, I realize he was never really part of the America First MAGA movement. He was always he was in this for himself. Now, one of my greatest fears that I have is that we will get a Republican candidate in 24 who is Trump without all of his deficits. I mean, the deficit being, is not insane. Josh Hawley should scare the crap out of you. Ron DeSantis should scare the crap out of you. Ted Cruz is a clown. But there are an up-and-coming group
Tom
of...
Cotton?
Tom Cotton
Is he worth worrying
Tom
about?
Cotton should scare the crap out of you. Now, they should scare you because they believe worse things than Trump does, because they believe things. Trump is a creature of his impulses, his ego, his needs, his momentary inclinations, whatever gives him, whatever pays him money, fellates his ego or gives him an erection is what Donald Trump pays attention to. These guys believe in really dark shit. I mean, Tom Cotton is a I don't want to say the N-word. He is a nationalist populist, as is Josh Hawley, where they believe that the state should make economic decisions at a scale that will produce the requisite number of necessary Volkswagens, if you take my meaning. These guys are not small d Democratic figures. They are not small r Republican figures. They are believers in a nationalist and populist authoritarianism and statism. They come from Planet Facebook. Well, that's the other thing, by the way. That is the fundamental underpinning of why our democracy is in huge trouble. Because Facebook has become a messaging channel for people who say, hey, you know what? We believe that the government should pick companies that win or lose based on our political preferences. We believe that, you know, we should make racially conscious voting laws. We should do this and this and this. Well, between Fox and Facebook, they have separated out a cohort of Americans that, you know, number between 60 and 80 million people who live in a different world now. And that different world rewards different things. It rewards people like Josh Hawley for trying to literally be a part of a coup to overturn the 2020 election. It rewards him. Josh Hawley has gained power, not lost power, because he was part of encouraging a criminal mob that stormed the Capitol and killed police officers. Okay, so these people that are coming down the line, it's why the fight that listen, I wanted to go and, you know, beat the sword into the proverbial plowshare, sit under my arbor, and not have to fucking worry about Donald Trump anymore. I spent 5.5 years doing that. I really thought we had, you know, when my work in the Lincoln Project, we had 3 big missions. It was to defeat Donald Trump. We did it. It was to punish some of his enablers. We did that too. It was also to defeat Trumpism. We failed utterly. I admit it, I own it. We didn't have the resources, bandwidth, and an understanding that just calling it Trumpism was something we tricked ourselves on. We fooled ourselves on it, because it's not. It's authoritarian populism, okay? It's nationalist statism. It's a long-running undercurrent in the world where people can be manipulated by their grievances and their hatreds, and they become a force of political danger. And as it is iterated in past generations, it usually ends up with bodies stacked on rail cars, okay? And not just in America or not just in Germany, but in you know, Cambodia and Russia and China, and it goes bad and it goes wrong and it goes really dark. And so, you know, as much of a smartass as I am, I do believe that the system of governance we have in this country was for generations a shining example to the world, an inspirational example to the world, for all of our flaws, from the beginning, I mean, from the error in the operating system in the beginning of slavery. This country really did slowly grind its way, bending the arc 1 millimeter at a time, to being what we should be. And it sickens me that there are people in office now that I helped elect who don't believe that, who've taken on this new idea that the world is going to be how they choose to see it, and not how the Constitution wanted it, or the founders wanted it, or the ideals that they claimed to once believe in would have led it to. They now believe that it should be something very dark. And so I don't get to go and ride off into the sunset or retire or just write books anymore. I still have to go out and you know, Steve Schmidt and I get up in the morning, and Steve and Stuart Stevens and Reed Galen, I get on a phone call every morning, a Zoom every morning. And our first thing we say is, how are we going to kill bad guys today? Because that's our job now, is getting rid of bad guys. And Donald Trump was the bad guy. There are more bad guys, unfortunately, to you know, tack up on the barn. So here we are. Anyway.
Tack up on the barn. All right. Pause for Rick Wilson. I'm glad he lives here in Tallahassee, where we have bad guys. So,
We have a few.
yeah, you feel like answering a
Oh,
couple
sure, I'll answer
questions
some
from the
questions.
peeps?
Yes, ma'am.
Redistricting.
It's an exciting, once-a-decade opportunity to fuck up the state of Florida. Listen, we are hypothetically now in a nonpartisan redistricting environment with Amendments 5 and 6. Horseshit.
Yeah.
Rich Heffley, down there at the Republican Party of Florida building, and the guys in the Senate staff will still draw the lines the way they want to draw the lines, okay? And if I were the Democrats, I would invest more money in lawyers than in any other thing when redistricting comes along. I mean, you gotta throw lawyers at it. You gotta sue the shit out of people. It's gonna be a harder hill to climb because the courts have become much more conservative in the last 10 years. And they've gotta realize, oh man, I'm gonna get in so much trouble. I'll tell you who the first person that calls the Republicans the day the census numbers come out. The first people. I'll tell you who it is. It's African American members of Congress. And they say, protect my seat, keep my seat as it is with 70 or 80% performance level, and I won't say a word, and I won't fight you, and I won't throw in on the lawsuits, okay? And that's why you have a handful of African American seats and a whole shitload of hardcore Republican seats, because they are able to smear all that peanut butter into the tightest possible area. You would have a much more balanced approach. And again, if you had one less African American member of Congress, you'd have 2 more Democrats aside from that, at least, in South Florida particularly. Now, I believe redistricting should be applied with a eye that looks like 5 and 6. But the deal making will be as it has always been. I'm just telling you the truth about how Republicans operate. They are willing to give those African American Democrats everything they want because they know that it helps their own political calculus. And they can hold their heads and go, well, you know, we were told they wanted to keep so-and-so in Jacksonville. Well, I know the other 6 seats are now R+5 or 7 or 12, but what could we do? And they act all innocent about it. There's a political nature to it that you can't underestimate the people that perform that job. They are utterly amoral, and some of it's because they want to protect the African American members of Congress want to protect their seats. I get that. That's an understandable motivation. But you know what? If you're at 70, if you're at D+25, and you knock it down to D+10 or D+7, you're still going to win. You have to work a little harder.
Yeah, we've dealt with that in Florida for what, 30 years, 40
Yeah.
years, forever?
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Forever.
we've seen it over and over and over again. And, you know, remember y'all maybe when they drew that district for Katherine Harris that looked like this? You know?
Well,
yacht.
Yeah, they do the
yacht.
district for
Yeah.
Corinne Brown, though,
Yeah,
that looked,
exactly.
that looked, as they say, like a modern art masterpiece.
Yeah, it did.
But then you traded it for one that goes from Jacksonville to Tallahassee.
I get it. Listen, I get it. I mean, strategically speaking, that's the inflection point where Republicans will exploit the Democratic Party in redistricting negotiations. Been to that rodeo. Yes, hey.
I have a question about conservatism in general, not just in the US, in Europe too. We have
Okay.
a lot of problems with how, so in Germany, for example, it used to be the Conservative Party and there was nothing to be towards the right. So now there is, and the conservatives are always in this problem. Are we embracing?
Right,
the
so
racism?
the traditional coalition of the CDU and the CSU, the Christian Social Union and Christian Democratic Union in Germany, CDU being the larger of the two, CSU being the Bavarian version. So imagine the Republican Party and the Tea Party. Not Trumpy, but you know, more right than the rest of the party. Well, now there's a rising party called AfD, Alliance for Deutschland, which is very Trumpish, very racial, very anti-immigrant. And so they basically hollowed out a lot of the votes for the CSU and the CDU, and they've caused enormous imbalances in how the CDU and CSU coalition can govern. So it's allowed other parties like the SDP and everybody else, and the Greens to, you know, churn the water. But this is what happened, it's happening through a lot of Europe. You've got far-right parties that are emerging.
What's conservatism's answer to that?
Yeah, that's the problem, is right now conservatism doesn't have a sharp answer to that because a lot of their base has become disconnected from ideology. And the Fox problem doesn't exist in Germany, but there is still an online problem in Germany, for sure. I mean, my son right now is working the Albanian prime minister's race at the moment, okay? There's a guy they're running against who is Albania's Donald Trump. And he is advised by Steve Bannon, which, you know, one of my great pleasures in life is kicking the shit out of Steve Bannon. When things started up in 2015, Steve Bannon literally ordered Breitbart to go after my kids. My daughter's up there, okay? They threatened her, they harassed and stalked. So anytime I can fuck with Steve Bannon, I will fuck with Steve Bannon. He tried to start Nazi Hogwarts in Germany. He tried to start this school in Germany for like far-right kids. Well, by sheer fucking coincidence, a guy I went to college with is a senior intelligence official in Italy now. And I helped get rid of Nazi Hogwarts. But the idea of these nationalist populists in Europe, I mean, obviously we've seen this movie before. It's not a good one. We want to avoid it. And I helped the CSU in 2004 and 6, a little bit of stuff, nothing major, but that is a country that is changing rapidly. And there's also, when you get long-serving leaders like Angela Merkel, you do end up with some sort of friskiness at the base. They want a little change, even in your own side. I think it's a worrying concern. I am a pro-immigration person. I'm a humanitarian. I do think Merkel overshot on the number of immigrants that came into the country. They couldn't absorb them politically or logistically fast enough. But you know, you keep your eye on AFD. They are incredibly dangerous. And you scratch AFD and you will find some much uglier people
I
underneath.
just worry about conservatives by losing these people. I mean, they kind of are their voters. What happens? I
Yeah,
mean,
well, that unfortunately, what happens? Unfortunately, they don't learn the lesson that you have to rebuild and expand your brand in other directions. They say, oh well, if AFD have become comfortable with, you know, the rhetoric of that skirts right up to the German law about talking about the Nazis, and skirts right up to the German law on the symbols and the affectations. The answer shouldn't be let's go embrace what they're doing. The answer should be we need to persuade them to come back. They have a hard time understanding that persuasion is a difficult game to play with authoritarian statists. Yes.
So, we see how polarized this country has become.
A little bit.
A little bit. And I truly believe that the answer lies somewhere in the middle, right? There's the answer can be compromised. Is there a think tank out there working on what those answers, the center answers, the middle thing could possibly be? Because going down this route of
Yeah, there are a lot of groups that are sort of blossoming now in that space, none of which are Fox or Facebook. And here's the thing. I'm a centrist, but I'm not a moderate. Because you know what moderates are? They're politically dead in this country. It's not moderation people are after. It's practicality, solutions, adult grown-ass governance. I mean, just being in the squish gets you nowhere. And because, you know what? Progressives look at moderates and say, traitor. Conservatives in the Trump space look at moderates and say, traitor. And I've been called every kind of name in the book. And believing that there is a great center in this country is not the same as just saying, oh, I want to be nice. I'm not nice. I'm not a nice guy. I'll burn your fucking house down. I mean, I'm not a nice guy. And that's the other problem is a lot of people conflate pleasant affect with moderation and centrism. We need radical centrists in this country. We need centrists who are willing to fight. We need centrists who are willing to get out there and knock the shit out of bad guys. And you know, look, one of the things we said about the Lincoln Project was we're not a policy organization. We're not. We are not a policy organization. Our policy is democracy and freedom. I'm not going to argue about parts per billion of carbon or whether I should have a 20 or a 30 round magazine in my AR-15 or anything else like that. I'm not going to argue about when an abortion is good or bad. I'm not going to argue about that. The big picture stuff that we need to fight about is about whether we're gonna be a constitutional democracy or whether we're gonna slip into authoritarian statism. Yeah,
I have a question. When are you gonna be back on the media at Walmart?
Yes.
well, I don't know.
We miss you.
Yep.
Thank you very much, I appreciate you saying that. I may be back on my own podcast before that resolves itself. Major media institutions get very nervous sometimes, and so here we are. Hopefully soon.
Would you care to address anything? I mean, I'm a longtime supporter of
Sure.
the project, and great admirer of your work and very appreciative.
Yeah.
You know, through the recent controversy, I kind of took a wait and see attitude.
Sure.
And didn't.
Well, we have a very expensive law firm producing a big report about that issue. And I've been told in no uncertain terms, never ever say another word about it until we issue our report, because you don't want to be seen as trying to influence the outcome of the report.
Fair enough.
But I will say this, with the thing we publicly said about John Weaver after the revelations came out in the New York Times, which were the first time we were aware of those revelations, was when the New York Times said on Thursday night before the Friday story, hey, do you have a comment about this? And we went, fucking God. And, you know, off the record, I've never been more angry in my life and more heartbroken and deceived in my life. And I'll burn his house down.
I think on that note, y'all might be able to get Mr. Wilson to personalize a book, but you have to buy it first, okay? Just saying, okay? But we are so grateful to have you here.
Well, thank you
That
very
worked
much.
out.